Thank you, Zoonen, for organizing today, and thank you, Aletta, for the in-depth presentation. It is a tough act to follow. Let's see. So yes, as Reach, as support to the Cash Working Group, we conducted last year a financial service provider mapping and assessment. This was funded by USAID, and I can share some of the findings. I'll go through it a little bit quickly. First of, we'll talk a little bit about the methodology, mainly just the research questions that we sought to answer in this research. Then we go into the findings, FSP capacity and experience, some of the pricing and the fees that were shared with us, and then the obstacles and challenges that FSPs and their agents sort of reported to providing cash and voucher assistance in the settlements. As a research question, first of all, we wanted to know what was the capacity and the experience of different FSPs for delivering CVA and refugee settlements. And secondly, what is the experience also of humanitarian partners in partnering with different FSPs and to deliver cash and voucher assistance, and which delivery mechanisms do they use? What are then the risks and the challenges with potential barriers to inclusion perhaps associated with the use of different delivery mechanisms? And finally, we also looked at the preferences of beneficiaries, but I shall not be presenting that today considering Aletta's previous presentation, which was so in-depth. One thing to note is also that data collection took place last year in July and August, and these were the dark days of COVID movement restrictions, so data collection took place remotely. Important to note. We used a mixed methods approach. We developed several surveys. One of them was structured, and this was targeting FSP staff, mainly branch level managers inside the regions. And then we also did semi-structured interviews with financial service provider agents, so including M&O agent and also banking agents. We then did interviews with humanitarian actors to get their response, so you can think of program coordinators, M&E officers, these sort of key informants. And finally, we interviewed beneficiary representatives of the Refugee Welfare Council. In total, about 180 interviews were concluded in that regard. So on to the findings. First off, this is a map that you can find on page 20 of your report. Perhaps you want to peruse it in your own speed, but this is largely a mapping of answers to the question, if we have the base of operations of the FSP, which nearby settlement are you currently providing services, or could you potentially provide services? So many FSPs, of course, being located in urban centers near to a settlement. So if you have Palorina, you would have Moyo, or you have Kitgum near Palabek, or Arua, these kind of places. And then we asked them, okay, what is the nearest settlement that you could provide services to, or maybe you're already providing services? And then what is your type of presence that you have inside the settlement? And there were 4 response options there. They could have a branch location inside the settlement, which did happen sometimes. They could have an agent network inside the settlement. They could have a branch location and an agent network inside the settlement. And finally, they could say we have currently no presence in the settlements. And you can see with the color coding and also the symbol, if in case you ever have it in black and white before the name. So please take a look at that carefully on page 20 in the report. To speak a little bit more then on the type of presence that FSPs reported, we saw that there was a difference in the regional difference between what FSP is reporting. So if you see here, the beige is the West Nile region, the beige bar, and the red bar is the Southwest region. And the percentage of FSPs reporting no presence was much higher in the West Nile region. And also the percentage of FSPs reporting to have a branch location inside the settlement. You can see that 26% in the Southwest region versus only 13% in the West Nile region. And the presence of a branch location, of course, can be quite important because it usually entails that a higher level of service delivery can be provided, and also customer care support can be elaborated, as well as operational and technical support for a possible agent network that is there. So then we also asked next, what is the size of the agent network, if you do have an agent network. And here we see that in all 13 settlements, we could find at least one mobile network operator who reported to have an agent network inside the settlement. And we see that MNOs generally reported a larger agent network compared to banks. This is not completely surprising because we also understand, of course, that banking agents generally have to conform to more stringent startup requirements, receive a higher level of training, and also offer a more complex range of services generally than mobile network agents. However, we also showed that from the interviews, many mobile network operator agents are also banking agents, so they could very well be both. Finally, we asked FSPs if they were able to increase the number of agents in the settlement in case of need, in case of signing a humanitarian contract to support cash and voucher assistance, and 81% of the FSPs reported that they were able to increase the number of operational agents inside the settlement within 1 month of signing a contract. Next, we asked FSPs what they see as the most suitable ways for delivering cash inside the settlement. They could select multiple here, but we really encouraged the key informant to choose one. And again, there were notable differences between the Southwest region and the West Nile region. In the West Nile region, again in beige, we see that FSPs most often reported non-digital delivery as the most suitable, whereas in the Southwest region, digital methods such as mobile money and also bank transfers were seen as most suitable by 70% of interviewed FSPs. Mobile money was also more often reported in the West Nile region as most suitable compared to bank transfers. And finally, 73% of FSPs reported capacity to support more than one delivery mechanisms, often, of course, perhaps direct cash and a digital form of delivery, like bank transfers or mobile money. We asked which of the FSPs already have experience in supporting humanitarian cash and voucher assistance. So for banks that we interviewed, we saw this was quite equal across regions. But when we look at MNOs, especially mobile network operators, we see that there's a big difference between the West Nile region and the Southwest region. So 81% of MNOs reported that they had this experience, and only 13% in the Southwest region. So this is most likely also a function of the fact that banks are more established in the Southwest region. So humanitarian partners maybe are partnering more with banks there and not in the West Nile region. But that was a big difference that we saw. And we then asked also what was the largest transfer value associated with the CVA program that you supported. And here we noted very clearly that banks generally supported larger programs with a median value of 690 million UGX. And MNOs reported to support generally smaller programs with only a median value of 140 million Ugandan shilling. On the pricing and fees, we asked FSPs what kind of pricing they would employ in case of a humanitarian bulk transfer. And largely we saw that they sort of deploy 3 different pricing models. They can either charge a flat fee per transfer, or they can charge a percentage of the value transferred, or they apply a tier system whereby it is either a flat fee or a percentage, but it changes depending on how large the transfer value is. Usually with a larger transfer value, the fee goes down. We noticed that key informants were generally a bit reluctant to disclose the fees of their institution. And so we were not able to get this information from all the banks and all the MNOs that we interviewed. But some did make it clear that the specific fees they would charge were dependent on the negotiation with the particular humanitarian agency, and it would depend on the specifics of the project they wish to carry out. Of the FSPs that did provide us with this answer, we see that there was 2 banks reported to charge a flat fee per transfer, and this flat fee ranged from 1,000 to 2,500 shilling. We had one bank who charged according to a tier system, and you can see here the tiers. I won't go over them due to time, but you can maybe hopefully see the slides later. And we have a mobile network operator who also said to report to charge a flat fee of 390 shilling per transfer. And we had another MNO who reported to charge a tier system, and there were two different tier systems that they used, depending on whether the transfer was made within the network or to outside the network, and that made a very big difference on the fee that would be charged. So that's important to note. Finally, a little bit on the obstacles and the challenges that FSPs reported to us. First, we asked them about the liquidity. How often does a lack of liquidity among your branch or among your agent network lead to a delay in service delivery, such as maybe facilitating withdrawals? Here we see that it was more common for MNOs to report this as a challenge. 42% said it was sometimes causing delay, meaning about once a month, and others said 38% actually said that it was happened regularly. Among humanitarian key informants that we interviewed, about half mentioned that liquidity among banking agents and mobile money agents was an issue that had caused a delay in the rollout of their CVA program, meaning that access to vital assistance was delayed. We also asked agents how they deal with a lack of liquidity, especially on distribution days, perhaps, of cash and voucher assistance. And they reported that they mostly rely on other agents within the settlements to top up their float or their liquidity. And this is also where the concept of a super agent sort of comes in. Some FSPs use this concept of a super agent, which is a larger agent which has more capacity, more forms of service delivery, and also usually a larger liquidity in store. The fact that this super agent is present in the settlement can really drastically simplify the way in which other agents can top up their liquidity, because it means they don't have to travel outside of the settlement. They might not have to travel to a nearby urban center to top up their liquidity, and this is a big efficiency gain. Interestingly, also, several agents reported that liquidity was less of an issue on humanitarian distribution days, because the FSP staff of the bank or of the MNO was actually in the settlement on those days, and so they could also easily provide more liquidity in that way. Finally, also know your customer requirements and a lack of connectivity. Those were two real challenges that were mentioned quite a lot by FSPs and reported. 30% of FSPs reported that the lack of valid ideas among settlement populations was a significant obstacle towards providing services there. It was also reported that equally by the different FSP types, banks and MNOs, and also across regions, although in the Southwest region, the Know Your Customer requirement was mainly reported in Uruchinga and Nachivale. I should also mention that it was not often reported by the beneficiary representatives of the Refugee Welfare Council that we interviewed as a particular challenge. But when we interviewed humanitarian partners, they did report serious delays or issues when it came to registering beneficiaries, especially for mobile money and using that as a delivery mechanism. Then on connectivity, 63% of FSPs reported that the lack of mobile network or internet coverage was a serious obstacle inside the settlements. Again, all types of FSP reported this and across regions. Agents we spoke to, they in the interviews reported that bad weather can cause issues and that really translate into a loss of income and business for them, because customers might be unwilling to wait and they decide to complete the transaction elsewhere or delay the transaction. And of course this particularly affects MNO agents who generally have more competition inside the settlement. And they also reported that what happens sometimes when the connectivity is bad, that there's a transaction that can be lagged, and because it's not going through, they do it twice, and if they don't know it in time and are able to reverse it with the principal MNO, this can result in a loss of income for them directly. So this was a big challenge that agents themselves reported to us. 2 minutes, that should be fine. We asked FSPs then what kind of special outreach they do to maybe promote access to their services inside the settlement for vulnerable populations. 62% of the FSPs we interviewed reported not conducting any special outreach. Of the ones who did, the groups most often targeted were persons with disabilities, elderly, refugees in general, persons who have trouble reading and writing, and finally only 15% of FSPs reported to target specifically women, which I think indicates that there's maybe more progress to be made there. Looking at the support mechanisms in place, both agent and beneficiary key informants reported that there were issues with toll-free lines not being very responsive, and many issues requiring beneficiaries or recipients to travel in order to resolve an issue, meaning that they would use the toll-free line but were told that the issue cannot be resolved remotely, and then they still need to travel to the nearest urban center, and this is not always possible and comes at a great cost to beneficiaries as well. Agents also explained that the lack of digital literacy and experience in handling e-wallets and digital cash can leave beneficiaries very vulnerable to risks such as fraud and scamming. And then this is my final slide. On the issue of data protection, we had the majority of humanitarian key informants we interviewed reported that they signed a memorandum of understanding with the contracted financial service provider. But there were also several key informants that reported not being aware of any data sharing policy in place and not to think that that was a particular risk, which was quite surprising to us. Out of the 47 financial service providers who reported having partnered with a humanitarian organization to deliver cash and voucher assistance, only 20 reported to have signed a data protection agreement. So that was also something I think that there's more space there to improve. Those were the findings that I wanted to share with you today. I'm happy to take your questions and to give the word back to Marijke. Thank you.